Welcome back to Pure Oxygen. Well, not many Americans are familiar with the plight of Abok Alpha Akok, an 18-year-old Sudanese woman who was sentenced to a brutal flogging after being charged with adultery. Now, religious and human rights groups were influential in overturning Akok's original sentence, execution by stoning. Yet many disturbing questions still remain. Here now to answer some of them is our She-SPAN political panel, Democratic consultant Deidre Levine, and Republican strategist Lisa Pinto. And Jennifer Baumgartner is not with us today. She's at a secure location somewhere. We can't talk about it. Okay, well, Lisa, let me start with you. A lot of us probably aren't very familiar with this case because it hasn't really been in the news lately. So give us the details of what's going on with this woman.
It's a terrible story, May. It's an 18-year-old Christian woman in Sudan, which, as we know, is a Muslim country. And she's married, and she got pregnant, and the allegations were that she had committed adultery. So quickly, they took her to trial without benefit of an attorney. The proceedings were in a language she didn't understand. She was sentenced to be stoned to death. It's barbaric. Well, some of the human rights groups stepped in and said, please, don't persecute minorities. So what happened was she ended up having her sentence commuted to only 75 lashes.
Right, right. Still a brutal sentencing.
Yeah, and she said she was raped.
Well, that's the thing. There's no evidence right now as to who's telling the truth, and she didn't even have a chance to speak on her behalf. She didn't have any legal representation whatsoever. Well, Deidre, this is obviously something that a lot of human rights activists are very involved with, saying this is a violation of human rights. Is the U.S. involved? Have they become involved? Should they be involved?
Well, they have been involved through a lot of the human rights organizations, as you two both mentioned, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, large non-governmental organizations, religious scholars in the United States who have been watching this as an issue growing rapidly as a problem in countries like the Sudan. But also there are some governmental responses. One that took place in 1997, which was when Clinton imposed sanctions against the Sudan.
For human rights violations.
Exactly.
But the problem.
But did that do anything? Obviously not, if this is still going on.
No, and actually I personally don't agree with sanctions as a method of public policy. I don't think that they do accomplish much, but they are a message that the government can send to say we disagree with what you're doing. Short of going in and imposing our own moral values on another culture, they're the way that we can respond.
And the problem with the Clinton response, May, was that in '97, remember the kid in Singapore who vandalized
Michael Fay.
18 cars he vandalized,
right.
and so he was going to get caned. Well, let me tell you, I've been to Singapore, there's no street crime there. Unlike this country where juvenile hall is a revolving door of kids graduating to bigger and better felonies. But I think Clinton's mistake there was saying, well, we don't want you doing this to an American national. I think that's where it was inappropriate for us to mess.
Well, that's what I find interesting, because Michael Fay, that case got so much press. It got so much attention. Oh, don't do this to this poor kid who vandalized so many cars. And you are in a different country. You have to follow the rules. I remember I was in Asia at the time, and I was thinking, you did it, kid. You got to take the punishment. You know, but why is it being treated so differently? Because he's an American? Is that the only reason?
I believe that is the primary reason.
So this poor woman, because she's Sudanese and a minority in Sudan, it just doesn't matter.
Because she lives in that culture and she grew up in that culture. Of course, being of Christian faith does not follow the Sharia law that was being imposed upon her, but she knew that this was the law of the land.
But the dangerous trend here, May, is we saw that the Taliban started off by shooting women in the head in crowded soccer stadiums. Next, they attacked us. So I think it's good that these organizations are taking a stand against this kind of barbarism and outrage, especially where religious minorities are at stake.
But herein lies I guess the problem when you're trying to deal with cultural differences and religious differences, although we may not agree with them, of course, especially with things like the Taliban and how they treated the women. I mean, can we impose what we believe in? Can we impose our own culture? You know, and really get involved in specific issues like this. Is it proper?
Yeah,
is it?
You know, our Judeo-Christian Bible used to say that it was okay to stone people for adultery, but we've evolved as a society.
We've evolved as a society into a society that still has the death penalty. We're one of the few industrialized nations that still puts people to death for crimes. So we've evolved.
The death penalty in this country is applied after 11 years of appeals, after due process of law for
I'm not
people
disagreeing.
like Andrew Yates
process
who
here,
deserve
Lisa,
it.
Process here, Lisa, is extremely different. You know, if people don't understand the language in which the trial is being held, we provide interpreters. If people want legal representation, we provide it.
That's
but
why
still,
the death penalty is
we have to be careful
applied
talking about what our moral prerogatives
are. But see,
are.
this is where the human rights groups are doing their job, because instead of pointing the finger and saying, why don't felons in America have voting rights? Why is there a death penalty? We're a rogue nation. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch are doing doing their job here, which is protecting Christians abroad who are being persecuted,
Sure.
and Jews too.
Let's make
Oh,
sure
wait,
that we
wait,
don't
okay,
act hypocritically, though.
Right,
We
but
recognize
where's
our own faults.
You just made a point, protecting Christians abroad. So does that mean that if you're not a Christian abroad, then you don't count?
Or Jews,
I mean, where
or
do we draw
moderate
the line? How do you define who's protected and who isn't?
Well, all I can say is that Muslims in this country are a lot safer than Jews and Christians abroad. Look what happened to poor Mr. Pearl.
What are moderate Muslim clerics saying about this whole
Nothing.
case? Nothing?
Nothing. Where are they?
No, moderate Muslim clerics are saying very little, if anything at all, and any indications that we have from other religious authorities are that they condemn this kind of action, that it's not an appropriate way to act to another human being. It's barbaric. So I think that religious scholars in general in America and people of faiths in other faiths or in the Muslim faith disagree with this action.
So what are we talking about then when it comes to this situation with this woman O'Cook, about the situation for women in these types of environments? I mean, is this ever solvable? Is this something
Yes.
that we...
We
Yes,
liberated
how?
the women of Afghanistan. We can liberate the women of Iraq and Iran by sending troops in there
All
and
right,
getting
we
rid
liberated
of
the
these
women
dictators.
in Afghanistan because the Taliban or Al-Qaeda attacked the U.S.
Right.
so severely that we had to take action. In this case, it's one woman in this country where people don't even know where this country is.
It's not, though. It's not just one woman in one country. This is in Nigeria. This is in Iran. This is in other countries. And women are being stoned to death, and women more than men. Men who commit adultery
Men
are not
get off
being...
over there,
they
right?
get off.
They don't even get
They
punished.
say that there's not enough evidence to try them, but there's enough evidence to try the woman. It's living in a very strange set of rules that make absolutely no sense. We must do something, but we can't send the military in each time we see that there's a moral problem on somebody else's part.
But it's a warning sign that there's a problem.
It is a warning
for
sign. You're
democracy.
absolutely right about that. Okay, after the break, has reality TV gone too far? Is it ABC series profiling soldiers in Afghanistan patriotic or dangerous? We'll debate this when we come back. You're watching Pure Oxygen. Don't go away.